Welcome, Jim, to the show. Really excited about our upcoming conversation on quitting. Normally, everybody's on here talking about go, 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 never give up, do all this stuff. But you want to talk about quitting. And I agree. I think it's something our audience needs to hear about. So why don't you let the audience know a little bit about your background, what you're doing today, and then let's dive in.
Great, David. Thank you. It's really such a delight and an honor to be here with you and to be with your guests. I've been working for 40 years. I've been for 10 years in the hospital administration business, 22 years with medical device companies with responsibilities in 3 continents, and 8 years as an entrepreneur. I've started my own business and have my own business. And originally I was consulting, but now a couple of years ago, I got a certificate in professional and executive coaching, and I'm focused now on coaching and mentoring. And I also teach at a small little Methodist school in Fort Worth called Texas Wesleyan. I'm part of the undergraduate business school adjunct faculty, and I teach a course a semester. So between teaching and coaching and mentoring, I'm about as busy as I want to be. So thank you.
And I have often said, our nation would be so different if we taught leadership and soft skills in school, and particularly at the college level. But if we started at 6th grade and worked it up type of thing, we'd be a totally different nation. So I'm so glad to hear you're doing that.
Thank you. It's interesting, David. They pay me $5,000 a class to do this, and I actually give the money back to the school. And over time, I've created endowed scholarships. So when I start class, I ask the students, why am I here? Well, you're here because you're making money. You're here because you want to teach. And I say, no, actually, there's one and really only one reason I'm here. I'm here for you, because they pay me and I give the money back so I can help out, kids that need help.
Yeah. What a statement for them. What a jarring thing in the world of TikTok videos and snippets and sound bites to have somebody be real and transparent. I bet they love it. We get all these complaints about Gen Z. What I think is Gen Z, Gen Y, all they want is, can somebody just be truthful with me? Be honest with me, be transparent, because I'm getting lied to constantly by all this media, yada, yada. So I think that's great.
Thank you. It's very rewarding. And you're right. It totally gets them engaged from the very beginning. And it's a whole different relationship throughout the semester.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So what led you to have this focus on teaching people when or how to quit? And what is that?
Well, we've all been there as entrepreneurs. And as I tell people all the time, there's many times when I never missed payroll and I've never had to hire money for working capital to make payroll. But there's many times I've never got paid, right? And there were extended periods of time. So my staff got paid, but I didn't get paid. And it's hard. It's absolutely so hard, as you know, because there are times when things look very bleak, when you could fold the tent, where maybe some other opportunity comes along, or people say, look, I want to come hire you. And I think the stick-to-itiveness and the perseverance is really, really, really important. And it's very challenging and very difficult out there, even for big companies, right? We could talk for the next couple of hours about huge companies that have failed and come back from near death, whether it's, the Hostess company with Twinkies, or whether it's Chrysler, whether it's Apple that was on the brink of complete disaster. There's so many stories that are pretty well known.
It's interesting. I hadn't thought about that before this conversation. You think Chrysler and you think Apple in particular, which may predate some of our audience here, but you and I were there and not involved in those companies. But it strikes me when you bring them up that there was some quitting going on, but there wasn't quitting and walking away.
That's right. And in Chrysler's case, of course, they used the law to their advantage. That they used the bankruptcy proceedings, went into bankruptcy, and eventually came out of that. And I don't think there's anything particularly embarrassing about doing that. If you have to do it, you have to do it, whether it's on a personal basis or on a company basis. Sometimes things happen and you have to recapitalize and you have to reestablish. But look what happened. They came out of it and created a thriving business and a thriving entity.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read Iacocca's book, Iacocca, that he, came out with afterwards. And I remember, and I teach regularly his practice of once a week, I call it sanctuary time, but every Sunday night, him retiring to the study away from the family and reviewing, okay, what did I want to get done last week? Did I get it done? Okay, what are the challenges and what do I need to do this week to keep the company afloat? And I teach people to do that. So many leaders are running around task-wise, meeting-wise, and they never pause to think. And I would assume you learned that habit yourself and you coach it with your clients too, something similar.
I do. And I also am trying really hard to get people to think about how they're scheduling their day, right? How many times have you been with a client or a customer like, I've got to go. The conversation's not done, but I got to hop on my next Zoom. And now what's happening is people are using too many portals for communication. I get messages on Teams, Slack, Outlook, WhatsApp, my cell phone. And everyone's now spending more time finding the messages than they are probably, just responding to the messages. So it's really important. And I know the first time I heard that story, what you talked about with Iacocca was from Jeff Immelt when he was GE Medical. He went into the office every Saturday, and for an hour, he looked back at his calendar and said, where could I have done things more efficiently, more effectively? What have I learned today about the time I spent the last week? And that retrospection, I think, is really important, really important.
It also reminds me, going back to Apple, Steve Jobs was best buddies with Jony Ive or whatever his name was. Ives, the guy who was his head designer. They'd have lunch every time both of them were in the office. And Jobs asked the same question of, what did you say no to? And years later, Ives told the story of that he said he realized that early on he would say, oh, yeah, I said no to this, I said no to that. But that was the easy stuff. I wanted to say no to it anyway.
Yeah.
And what he had to learn, and this ties in again, I think, to your whole quitting concept here, he had to learn to say no to the stuff he thought was really cool, but he already had his priorities.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things, and I know you've seen it in your career, I've seen it in my career, that smaller companies get really hamstrung with is opportunities. This is what we're going to do. This is our business, but someone told me, well, this might be good too. So let's go look at that. Or we can use this application over here. And now we're going to go over there. And now we're going to go all these different places. And what happens is nothing gets done because they're chasing too many work streams. Yeah. And that's where, one of the big things you learn, at least I learned at Abbott Laboratories in 11 years of working at a great company, at some point, if it's not going to work and the investment isn't paying off and the research isn't working in R&D, you just got to cut your losses and move on to something else. You gave it a stab. You invested the money. It just didn't work. So now it's time to go do something else.
Yeah, totally agree. So Jim, where do you want to talk to our audience about quitting?
Yeah. I think the important thing, David, is keeping the mindset, I think, and understanding that there is tremendous frustration out there, right? And particularly with a small company, I think having people be your confidant, having people be your coach, having people be your mentor, having a board of advisors, having people that you can bounce things off of, it's so lonely. I think a lot of people feel like they're on the trip themselves and they can't get any help, or there isn't help out there, or they can't afford help. And there actually is a lot. And before you quit, seek some of that help out. There's lots of people that can, even on an informal basis, mentor and coach, right? And don't get exasperated and feel like you're in this battle alone. There's lots of resources out there to help people.
But one thing that strikes me, and I totally agree with your advice, but one thing that strikes me is, because I'm also big into hiring, I got a hiring system, and I'm sure you do that excellently too, but talk to me about how they need to be careful who they're listening to so they can be realistic where that person's coming from and what they're going to get from it.
Well, one of the things you learn in big jobs, particularly when you come in a new job, is people will tell you what they want you to believe, not what you need to believe. And the same thing is really true of small companies. There are tons of people out there that will tell you they can help you. They can run your sales organization. They can help you hire the right people. They can run your accounting business, whatever it is. And we often, as entrepreneurs, take that in face value. Oh, there's somebody who says he can help or she can help. And I like the person. I seem to connect with the person. So I'm not going to do what I would do otherwise, which is vet that person out. Give me a list of your last 5 customers, your last 10 customers, right? What did you do for them? And there are so many people preying on small companies, providing support and advice and counsel that really have no idea what they're doing. And people, particularly desperate folks that are thinking about quitting, that are thinking about folding it in, like, I just met this person and they're going to save me. And it's just not always that simple. Yeah. But people get desperate and they make just like in hiring, they make bad decisions.
Yeah. There's a guy I know very well who had that situation where he had a funded startup, lost the funding, and then a guy walked through the door and said, "I'll solve all your problems." No background check, no reference check, just started, working with the guy, making him a partner. And I think, and I don't think from the story that the person was a bad person who came in and made those promises. He was just equally as incompetent as the person who was, accepting to work with him. And so I think you really have to vet them and have an understanding of, where's this person coming from?
I mean, David, I learned it the hard way. I bought a company and I had somebody who I thought could run the company. And in a few short years, he basically ran the company just to the ground almost. And because I thought I knew the person, but who he turned out to be and his capabilities were nowhere near what I needed for that job. And I just took it on face value, and I should have put him through assessments. I should have given him a lot more diligence, put him through a lot more diligence than I did. And it was a huge mistake. So
when you're talking about quitting, are you emphasizing more teaching people how not to quit, or how they should quit, or why they quit, or?
Well, I think there's a continuum, David. It's a good question. I think there's a continuum, and it's hard, right? It's absolutely hard making that decision. But I think there are alternatives before you decide to quit. But sometimes quitting is the best thing to do, right? Whether it's affecting your health or your financial situation or your marital situation or whatever it is. They're just, as a friend of mine that invests in a lot of companies, and he's funded a lot of companies, and I often call him and say, David, his name is David. I said, David, what do you think about this idea? And he said, Jim, the idea looks really good. But he said, what you and I don't know is how many other people are working their garages developing the same thing. Yeah. And so you may find out that even though you've got a really good mousetrap, there just isn't a need for a better mousetrap. People are happy with the ones that are on the market right now. And at that point, you just have to say, I tried it and it didn't work. And I got to stop pouring money into this thing and go figure out another way to make money, because there's tons of ways to make money. It's not always just the one idea that you have. Many people fail. That serial entrepreneurs, many of them have failed many, many times before they finally figured out the one niche that did well.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. And that was one of the big mistakes I made over the years. So I was very close to my Scottish grandfather who had grown up in the Depression. And he was self-made man. You work hard. He didn't teach me how to work smart, but I could work hard toe to toe with anybody. And when my biggest failures were when I didn't quit. And I didn't know, I was emotionally attached to what I was doing and looking forward. And I didn't know how to assess, where am I today? If I'm going to stay, can I do something different instead of doing the same thing and expecting a different result? Or telling myself I'm doing something different, but I'm really doing the same thing, expecting a different result. And understand I quit because one thing I didn't believe was that, there would be an opportunity as good as this one. And you just said it. I'm going to word it slightly differently, but one thing I had to learn is there's always another opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no shortage of great ideas and great opportunities. And part of what I tell my business students is you don't understand because you don't have the perspective. And that's not a complaint or criticism. how easy it is now to start a business, where when you and I started, it wasn't easy at all. There was no internet. There was no technology. It took a lot of time to build a business. You couldn't put something on Facebook and sell 100,000 units in a month, right? Or get on Twitter or get on LinkedIn or whatever it is. And all those things took a long time to get your brand out there, to get your product out there, to get your knowledge out there. Now there's just incredible amount of opportunity and technology that make it very inexpensive to try things. And I think people need to understand and not lose sight of the fact that it's not as complicated as it once was to retool and restart and reinvigorate.
Yeah. And I think this brings it back also when you're talking about if somebody's thinking about quitting, whether it's quitting a product line, whether it's quitting the whole business, whatever, if you're going to seek advice, get advice from people who are going to have the capability to look at all the data and then be strong enough to tell you what they truly think and not tell you what you want to hear, or they want to stay in it because they want to make coaching revenue from you or something like that, or some other sideline revenue. You got to really look at the person that you're getting the advice from. And Absolutely. Then you've got to decide. And is it also reasonable, Jim, that let's say you're in that position. So we're talking about a small business. It's not working for whatever reason. Hopefully it's not losing money. Let's just say it's breaking even, or it's losing assets it already had. So the person not going more deeply into debt. So what type of process should somebody plan to go through to kind of say, hey, I need to decide whether this is something to continue with or something to move on from? What does that process look like?
Well, I think it looks a lot like to your point, what's the cash flow? What is really happening here? How much more time do I have based on the cash burn and cash income I'm bringing in? And what does that look like? Being pragmatic about the short-term horizons. And I've found in many of these cases, David, your accountant, your CPA, your accounting firm can be a nice source of independence, right? They want you as a customer and they value you as a customer, but they're used to dealing with, in some cases, very difficult financial situations. And they often bring a perspective of the sustainability of the business. As my old accountant who retired used to say, Jim, I've rarely, in my 50 years of accounting, I've rarely seen a bad business idea. Rarely. He said, but what happens is people run out of money. And when you can't pay the bills and can't keep the electricity on and can't pay the salaries, you can't survive. And I think sometimes that independence and that wake-up call is an important jolt that you need. And I've found in my own personal experience, my accounting teams and CPAs are very helpful in that situation, right? Because we always think about mitigation and how can I make excuses, or maybe I can go another month without getting paid, or maybe I'll pay the rent late next month, or maybe I'll put this on a credit card, or maybe. And then all of a sudden it explodes and the whole thing falls off. Whereas you could probably, if you'd made a tough call, say, look, it's time to pivot and time to do something different. And let's take what we've got and move on from where we are.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a great point that as you seek those outside advisors, like if I go to somebody who's financially strong, CPA, accountant, whatever, they're going to give me this perspective of, okay, here's how much runway you got. Here's how much cash. Here's where it's bleeding, that type of thing. But typically they're not going to be, here's some ideas you can try.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
They'll give you something based on the numbers.
Correct.
But somebody else can go into another piece. Maybe you've got an example of that where somebody came in and opened an entrepreneur's eyes, or maybe you did, to, hey, this is killing you. Have you considered X or Y or Z type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I've had that experience in my own business. When I first started my business, I thought my expertise, my experience working in a large medical device company, my sales and marketing experience would be of a lot of interest to a lot of small companies. And I spent a year, part-time putting my business plan together and 5-year projections and how many clients I was going to need and what hourly rate it was going to take and all those things. And I jumped off the corporate express at 43 years old, making hundreds of thousands of dollars, great job, divisional vice president at Abbott Laboratories, and boom, started my business. And I was right, David. I was absolutely right. There are a ton of little companies that needed my help. But there was one thing I did not understand. I didn't have any money.
Yeah.
So I had to pivot and realize I needed to go find companies that had money, right? And my business plan was completely messed up because I didn't think my old company, Abbott Laboratories, would hire me as they did 2 times to do work. I didn't think Roche Diagnostics would hire me. I didn't think Terumo Medical would hire me. I thought small companies would hire me. So right in the midst of my launch and my whole campaign, I realized it was flawed because there were a ton of small companies, but they didn't have any money. Or if they did, in one case, I had a lady that I think probably took me 9 months to get paid from her.
Yeah. No, that's good. So it strikes me too, when I think back on the Apple thing where Steve Jobs didn't quit, he got fired. And then when he came back different in some ways. So he had to go through a rough time. He had to go through a learning experience. And then he came back differently. So when you're thinking of quitting and you're looking at this, what are the key areas that you want to consider? So we talked about talking with finance because you really need to get a good handle on the finances. And then what are the other areas you need to look at typically before you kind of throw in the towel or do a major pivot?
I think, it's cliche, but, it starts with the man in the mirror, to your point, right? Mm. Is the problem my business? Is the problem my product? Is the product my service? Or is the product me? Am I the right person at this time with the right engagement and the right attitude? Do I have the humility? Do I have the vulnerability? Do I have the approachability to build relationships, to understand how to create these human connections? And often we find people that decide for one reason or another to leave a big business where they're in charge of things and got big teams and big resources, and they go into a small company and they fail because they treat it like a big company and they don't roll up their sleeves and they order people around and they think everybody's there to, serve them, that they're all subordinate and they don't understand the real team, right? And how to build a team. So I think for many people who haven't just started as an entrepreneur, making that switch or the pivot that Jobs did, and so many other people, I think, we could talk about that have done the same thing. It's really important. And I don't think we often think it's us. And, one of the things that I think is the most important, in business is to know what you don't know. It's understanding what my weaknesses are and where my gaps are, whether it's building relationships, selling, interacting with people, doing client work, following up with that stuff. Being self-aware, I think, is still, one of the most important aspects of business.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, being the self-aware piece. But it also sounds like, Jim, you've been good on the financial piece to kind of analyze what's working, what's not. You have any tips on that for our audience on what to look for in the numbers and where to go from there?
Well, I it's a tangent, but I'll come back to your main question. And one of the things that I've suggested to a lot of entrepreneurs, and clearly I think in my case, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. A friend of mine who had a very successful small company had a lady who worked for him for 10 years, and she had a baby and she wanted to come back part-time, and he didn't want her to come back part-time. He wanted her to come back full-time, and she didn't want to do that. So he referred me to her, and, fast forward 20 years later, Paula is still with me. And my point in this story, David, is every minute I spend on back office stuff, accounting, entering stuff in QuickBooks, chasing down customers, fighting people over invoices, it's just a waste of time. There's a huge opportunity cost. And Paula does all that, and Paula's done all that stuff. So part of the answer on the financial piece is know what you know what you don't know. But there's a lot of the, my old boss used to call it donkey work, a lot of the real grunt work somebody can do for you so that I can be freed up and look at the financial statements. And the most important thing, as you know, is for an entrepreneur, an early stage company, never look at a spreadsheet, never look at a QuickBooks payout, look at the checking account and see where the money's going and see where the money's coming. Then, amount of fraud that happens in small companies happens because entrepreneurs take their eye off the ball. They don't know how to look at the money coming in and out of a business. They rely on people to put third-party statements and spreadsheets together, and they don't actually take time to look at the checking account and see where money's coming and where money's going. And they don't look at that monthly reconciliation between what it says on the spreadsheet and what it says in my checking account.
Hey, I'm sorry. I turned 65 earlier this month. I've never had anybody say that. So,
say what?
But I had a client, I don't know, 10 years or so ago that he had a trusted office manager who he finally realized was embezzling on the company credit card. And by the time he found out, it was like $80,000 or more. And it's exactly what you're saying. It take a lot of work. You don't have to add it all up. But if, as you say, just look at the bank account. I pull up our bank account and I'm not involved in the numbers. My son runs that part of the business for me. But, I just looked at, where's the money going, and just kind of seeing that and what you're saying in the credit card bill, if you have a credit card or multiple, just look at where it's going, because unfortunately, there's a lot of unscrupulous activity that can occur. And like in this guy's case, it started small. Okay. And it may have even started initially where she used the company card and paid it back. Okay. But then by the end, she was ordering furniture for her living room on the company credit card. Okay. Just, so it's, that's a great point.
It happens more often, David, than we know. And it may be not in your friend's situation, but in many cases, it actually is a tipping point that puts the company out of business.
Yeah,
it can be. And I learned that lesson. I have a small office building here and I have tenants. And early on, and I've had this building for 20 years, I rented space to two forensic accountants. And they're actually the ones that told me about all this stuff, because that's what they did. They just spent their entire time, mopping up things. And it's often relatives, right? Relatives, right. I see my uncle making 7 figures now, and he's only paying me 50 grand. So another 10 grand won't really matter because he or she will never notice it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I actually have a friend of mine right now going through a situation with a family member that embezzled millions from him, stealing top accounts, knowing his pricing, so undercutting him, doing all these things. So there was, I don't know how much was on the accounting side, but they had to do forensics on all the emails and the trails and things to identify. And this is something where at least a year before it blew up and he found out, he told me that there was something wrong. He didn't know what it was, but something was wrong. And he felt he was getting led, that there was something. He's a man of faith, and just felt he was getting something being told to him. And turns out it was much worse than he thought.
I'm in the healthcare space, as you know, and it happens a lot to physicians, particularly physicians that are in practices that have, high income, whether it's orthopedic surgeons or dermatologists or plastic surgeons, right? They're doing really well. They're making a lot of money generally. And somebody in their office, making 50 grand or 75 grand just decides, like you just said, it always starts with something small. I'll take $1,000 this month, or, 2,500 or, whatever. And it just builds. Yeah, it builds.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jim, will you please, what is the primary work that you're doing right now? Besides, I love your teaching, but I know you're really doing a lot of coaching. What type of people are you coaching?
Yeah, I'm coaching people at all levels from all industries. And I originally started out because my network was in the healthcare space, but I'm now working in virtually all industries. And I would say my sweet spot is individual contributors that have gone on to management positions. I personally love and I'm very passionate, David, about helping new managers succeed because we don't really give them the support that they need, or we may train them for 2 days, check off the box, put a note in the file, and then throw them to the wolves. So I really like young managers to succeed and help them. And conversely, I like to work with the very senior people because I think there's tons of challenges at the senior level. I've been at the senior level. It's very lonely at the top, and it's helpful to have somebody you can talk to on a routine basis to be a sounding board or a sounding person. So those are really the two areas I'm spending most of my time working in from a coaching standpoint.
Well, that's fabulous. So I hope people get a hold of you. What's your website, by the way?
It's you can go to jimwettrich.com. I've got information there about the book I published last October on Stifled, Where Good Leaders Go Wrong. And also wettrichgroup.com is my company website. But either of those, you'll be able to find me. And I'm also very active, as you know, on LinkedIn.
Fabulous. Well, thank you for being with us today. I think it's been a good discussion, a good reminder. And hey, I want to remind the audience, if you heard nothing else today, what Jim said about looking over your banking transactions, looking over the credit card statements, those types of things, that could save you millions.
Save your business. Yeah. And save you from having to make that difficult decision of should I quit?
Yes. Fabulous. Well, thanks, Jim. Wish you the best.
Thank you, David. You too. Best of luck.